Hi everyone. Today I'd like to go over my research on the famous forum, The Red Pill. Primarily, I want to investigate how the forum in some ways helped Trump get elected, and how we can see similar forums like this and overall organized misogyny in general having a very significant political impact. So first, what is the Red Pill? The Red Pill is a male supremacist community that was created on Reddit on around 2012. Ostensibly, according to its creator Robert Fisher, its purpose was to increase men's sexual form of self-help forum for Redditors who felt like they didn't have a lot of luck with women. It very much served as a place for men to communicate about, what they were doing in their lives, in order to get advice on how to eat better, how to be better men, how to essentially enact masculinity, which in some ways doesn't necessarily seem extremely harmful. But in reality, the Red Pill very much served as kind of a counter movement to what we typically think of as the feminist movement in popular culture. Through this counter movement, a lot of forum leaders very much advocated this ideology of the matriarchy being not only a thing that exists, but also something that was dramatically hurting men. They described some kind of organized system being implemented and instituted throughout a lot of countries in which women were at the center of all power rather than men. And they very much use a lot of misogynistic rhetoric to justify and create this ideology. Within this space, men were, on one hand, kind of constructed as victims, but on another hand, reconstructed as powerful figures through this red pill identity. This identity was supposed to kind of uplift men and kind of give them the power to take back their own personal lives. And it was very much done so through the creation of a lot of community dogma and rhetoric about how to act as men that situated one as an alpha male. Unfortunately, as you can most likely surmise, what this ended up turning into was kind of an outpouring of misogynistic rhetoric. When we investigate misogynistic rhetoric, we often don't necessarily see this kind of talk as politically significant. But in analyzing forums like this, we can kind of come to the conclusion that talks about gender and how this interface and how gender interface with the political system are actually quite politically important. But what we found particularly interesting about this talk was how this community that was supposedly so only concerned with kind of tearing down women and uplifting men ended up mattering politically, and how it ended up in a way influencing the political direction of the 2016 election. Now, I would not like to argue that the Red Pill Forum was the sole thing that caused Donald Trump to win the 2016 election, but we do offer up this conclusion that perhaps the kind of efforts of forums like this that, in a way, reoriented talks about gender, at least for a few dedicated groups of people, can actually be quite politically significant. So in looking at this community and how they developed over time, Dr. Rohlinger and I had two very important questions. One, we were concerned about the ways in which misogynistic men were able to think about gender in a way that very much informed and their political action. So we wanted to see how men thought of gender in such a way that they were able to use it as a kind of political tool, not only to rally other people around ideas of the way that gender should be in society and the way that we should understand the roles of men and women, of masculinity and femininity, but how that can be politically significant. And then, related to what we'll talk about in a little bit, I wanted to see how identities that people adopt online that are supposedly apolitical, totally devoid of politics, can actually become highly politicized over time. So how do we examine this forum? Well, what we did was we ended up investigating some of the top posts of the forum over a 4-year period. We went back into some of Reddit's archives and were able to use certain programs to determine what the most popular posts were at any given time. In doing so, we kind of measured the top posts around certain months and decided to analyze them in order to see how the rhetoric of the community changed. In doing so, we did what's called inductive content analysis to kind of systematically go through every single post that was made and every single comment that was made on those posts in order to see how the Red Pill movement was kind of evolving over those 4 years. So we examined 2 different types of posts in this analysis. The first were posts called field reports, which were basically like how men talked about ways that they used Red Pill theory and Red Pill dogma in their everyday lives. The second was men's rights posts, which very much talked about how men were facing systematic inequality in their daily lives. These were very useful because they kind of established overall goals for the movement. And what was interesting was that while men did discuss politics in some way and discussed that men's liberation in some fashion was a political issue, there was a very distinct phase of the forum in which the forum was extremely apolitical. We kind of called this phase 1. It was this period from 2013 to 2015 in which any organized talk of politics was completely derided, not only by kind of elite users, people that were very respected by other forum users, but just in general by the community. Essentially, anytime that somebody were to suggest political action or political action of other men was brought up as a possible solution, very much forum elites shut that content down, kind of saying that it didn't necessarily make sense to talk about forms of political action, but rather it made sense to focus on fixing yourself and fixing your ability to kind of interface with the outside world. This original understanding of the Red Pill was taken as a personal philosophy rather than a political dogma. And key to this were ideas of kind of sexual strategy, shared discourse among men, and a general sense of anti-feminist thought. I'm going to mainly focus on sexual strategy and anti-feminism for this talk. Sexual strategy was the term that the creator of the Red Pill came up with in order to kind of serve as a counter to feminism. This was very chief in performing 2 things for the movement. One, it established feminism as not a political movement necessarily, but rather as an interpersonal strategy that women were using to get ahead in society. And in order to counter that, men had to develop their own, personal movements, which is where the Red Pill came in. This was very important because it created a kind of apolitical oppositional consciousness to the idea of feminism. That's a term that we kind of talk about in social movement literature that refers to politically important ideas and opposition to various topics and various groups that isn't quite necessarily connected to a political party or to a political dogma. As, again, a personal philosophy, not necessarily a political creed. Very related to this was this idea of anti-feminism being extremely important. So an important rhetorical argument that Red Pillars used was that feminism was such a powerful force that it had essentially corrupted all women, which made all women feminists. And very chiefly, feminists were constructed as being opposite to the goals of men, that feminists and feminism would threaten men's happiness in the long run. Not only in doing this, they also connected feminism to various different evil social institutions like the media and the education system. This was very important because it ended up giving Red Pill men a common enemy. So if there was something wrong with their lives, they could always connect it back to feminism. Feminists and feminist institutions had created some giant problem that men had to deal with together, which served to kind of unite Red Pill men together. And what was very interesting about this was how said feminists, who were constructed as the enemy, were therefore sexualized and seen as sexual goals for men once they were able to conquer feminism. We could often see that if the red pill is kind of a guide to masculinity and how to be a proper man, the sexual conquest of feminists was kind of a worthy goal for them to aspire to, which again served as kind of a reward structure that facilitated participation within this movement. We saw a dramatic shift in this community when we started looking at a lot of the data in 2016. In this, there was a dramatic shift towards, instead of just talking about community ideologies and shunning the idea of community engagement, instead, red pillars very much shifted towards supporting Donald Trump. This was very interesting because red pillars were able to do this in two different ways, and both of these ways were very much tied to how elite users interacted with the forum. So chiefly, elite users were able to kind of link that previous idea of a sexual strategy to Trump's overall public image, and further, they were able to link Hillary Clinton to that overall feminist-led war on men that we previously discussed. This kind of served as kind of the, big theoretical turning point that caused us to, very much change the scope of our investigation. We saw this quote of, when somebody accuses a powerful or famous figure like Trump of sexual assault, I don't look the other way. I don't denounce them or their behavior. Instead, I run towards them because there is no truer signal which side somebody is on than when they're giving a bogus accusation by the establishment. This is our beacon to find allies in the war. That quote was made by the founder of the Red Pill Forum, who used kind of Trump's public pivot towards defending locker room talk during the 2016 election, and was able to very much use the media attention focusing on Trump's perpetuation of rape culture as kind of a rallying cry for red pill men. The statement here was that there was a anti-men feminist establishment that was in a way gunning for Donald Trump, and red pill men needed to act now by supporting Trump, otherwise their lives would be in jeopardy, essentially. Furthermore, this was facilitated by Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton. If Trump was kind of the leader of men and his masculinity was very much tied into that sense of sexual strategy, then Hillary would then be kind of labeled as a feminist icon, right? The person that would establish feminism into the public sphere permanently. So elite users were very readily able to shift this discussion to talking about how feminism would be defeated and how Hillary Clinton served as kind of the arch enemy of all of red pill men. What was also interesting was that when participants kind of attempted to negotiate with this or, say that this is a derailment from the forum's previous apolitical nature, they were shot down by red pill elites and other members of the forum who were saying that they weren't real men if they were supporting Hillary Clinton. Some quotes from these men's rights posts very much illustrates this. So users talk about how during this election season, they're not able to put up any walls between sexual strategy and politics because the outcomes of this election will be directly tied to men's fortune. And as the author of the post lays out, Hillary Clinton will use all of these anti-men tools to potentially imprison men, if not socially, then literally. And other men very much chimed in support of this political pivot, saying that it's impossible to adhere to red pill ideology and support Hillary Clinton, and that if the media were to successfully label what Trump did as sexual assault, then there would be no hope for men at any time. So what do we conclude from this? Well, what was interesting about this forum was that its kind of political shift was very much emblematic of broader political shifts during the 2016 election. We can kind of trace the political shift of this forum to a general pivot by alt-right actors and misogynistic actors into putting their agenda into the mainstream media. What we thought was extremely important here was that these highly misogynistic ideas were fashioned into very careful narratives, ones that not only illustrated men's role within society, but also situated men's role within a political context. What's important is not that just this one particular forum ended up shifting from being apolitical to highly supporting Trump. It's the fact that other forums also had this same process occur, and that this is representative of kind of larger shifts in how we view political polarization and political engagement. It's very often that we as scholars kind of shy away from labeling these kinds of forums as politically important, saying that they can't be linked to real-world politics. But the fact remains that a significant portion of men were able to draw upon this kind of rhetoric and become politicized in a way that they had not previously thought of. This represents kind of a new tactic of identity construction and of creation of political loyalties that we hadn't really seen in the non-digital age, right? It's only enabled by our connection to more extreme politics that we can often only access online. And so in the future, when we're examining online forums and how they can interact with various elections, we should investigate these kinds of identity building processes and see how these forums can link their narratives of what makes a, truly good person to certain political figures. And in the case of the Trump election, this is quite significant considering that Trump is the type of political leader that the US has not seen for a very long time. Related to this, what is kind of the future of the red pill? In late 2018, the forum was quarantined, which essentially means that it was very difficult now to access the forum for a mainstream audience. This, coupled with the fact that, in general, many movements tend to demobilize in the wake of extreme success, means that it might be a little bit less likely that we see an organized push for red pill politics within the mainstream political sphere once again. What's interesting is that you're seeing a lot of these forum users kind of scattering from the more mainstream sites like Reddit and instead creating their own sites, such as this TRP Red site that was actually set up as a kind of save point for all red pill data, just in the case that the red pill was eventually banned. In this case, we can kind of compare and contrast this to similar highly problematic communities such as Stormfront and other racist online communities that, when they received any kind of banning or site delisting, kind of scattered into various sub-forums and became much harder to track as an organized group. And it's important then that we kind of keep track of this kind of dialogue as it continues to evolve and change, and as it continues to become filtered throughout various different online communities. In general, I think that it's important to note here not only that this kind of misogynistic rhetoric very much concretely exists, but also that it existed in such an organized fashion that it was able to convince a community of previously completely apolitical actors that the only important thing that needed to be done was to vote for Donald Trump. And I do think that we'll see even more processes like this emerge as we get closer to the 2020 election, as we get closer to November. I think that you're going to see a lot of different actors coming out in force and making claims that we need to be advocating for a certain candidate. It's going to be interesting to see if their rhetoric remains the same as they are continually quarantined and potentially disavowed by the broader public.